Yes, you are welcome to the polling station. And after months of speculation, it has been confirmed that Joe Biden, and much to the delight of Paul Krishnamurty, will be running for presidency again next year. What does this mean for the markets? What does it mean for the Democratic side? What does it mean of the Republican side? And where are we at going into the next election? We have local elections coming up in Northern Ireland and mainly England next week, which we'll briefly touch on. And there has been a little bit of activity again on Fox News. Paul, no surprise, Joe Biden, I think when he went, he wouldn't have gone to Ireland without knowing. He wouldn't have gone to Ireland, back to his ancestral home, without knowing that he was going to be running next year. Donald Trump was dissing him at an NRA convention last week, which we might get to as well. Not much changing in the US, actually.
No, do you know what though? This whole Biden betting for the nominee thing is just a classic illustration of like the fragmented media and how multiple narratives, true or false, can be simultaneous. Because you know, if you're following this, it's been blindingly obvious for months. It's been reported that he's hired people to run his campaign. Like 2 months ago, that was the case, right? There has been no moves from any of his obvious main rivals like Newsom or Harris or Buttigieg, right, to suggest they're jumping in. So how has it been possible to back Joe Biden at reasonable odds, really, for months and months? And even now, I mean, he's 1.2 on Betfair to be the nominee. And who's he going to be up against? An anti-vaxxer in Robert F. Kennedy and a complete fruitcake in Marianne Williamson, right? It's a certainty. And, you really are betting on him getting ill or pulling out for those reasons, right? Which I don't see. As far as I'm aware, he seems in pretty good health and actually in better health than his likely opponent who's only 3 years younger, and yet nobody goes on about his age. So I think that people are underestimating Biden. They've underestimated him all the way through, and they're going to continue to do so.
Okay, well, to play the advocate of the devil there, William, I think people were obviously afraid that he's a bit old, and that he may just, slow down and so on and so forth. And the volatility of American politics as well maybe makes people a little bit skittish. But we were expecting this to happen, obviously.
Yeah, we were. And I think Paul summed it up perfectly. There's been a bit of market reaction to it. He was 13-8 yesterday. That went into 6-4. Then he's now 11-8. This is to be the president. And he's also 7s on to win the Democratic nomination, which, I know sometimes with these shows, people do expect you to be a bit more of a value seeker. But I got to agree with Paul in sort of my surprise that you can get 5s on the exchanges, and even 7s on with us in general, because there won't be any sort of contest. Marianne Williamson will do her thing, sure, but it's for clout, and like a Substack or something like down the line. I think Biden starts in about as good a position as he could have asked, all things considered, when he came in. It's important to be sort of rational about this, and also to remember, and this is the big thing I think looking forward now, his election chances I think are fundamentally going to be shaped by his opponent. At the moment, it looks like Donald Trump. That rematch really wouldn't infuse many Americans, which presents problems I think for both men. But I think his team would probably have taken this position, all things considered.
Okay, so it does look like Trump sort of has a little bit of a hold of the GOP again. He is 1-2 to be the nominee. It's interesting. DeSantis 11-4, and you still can't get 20s bar. Paul, I don't really see a situation though where Donald Trump can win this election. I think even on the right and in the Republican side of things, it's just too polarized now, and this kind of makes me wonder how Biden was so big a price for the last while. Where, I mean, he wasn't that long ago. Biden was like 3-1 to be the next president. Is there anything, and as much as American politics is nuts, is there anything that can happen if Trump does get the nomination that he actually wins this next election?
Yeah, oh yeah. I think I'm not ruling. I'm ruling. I think Trump's. I give Trump a much better chance this year, this 2024, than I
Why?
did in 2019 about 2020 or 2015 about 2016. Simply because I don't trust the anti-Trump coalition to turn out in the numbers that it did. Right.
Yeah.
I think that there was, from the moment that he came into politics and during that his tenure, there was an immediate sense of urgency and activism. And it wasn't just the left, it wasn't just the centre, it included hardline conservatives who could recognise that Trump was a grifter who didn't really represent them. It was independents who just didn't like this completely erratic figure who spends all his day on Twitter having stupid fights with people. And it was also the left, and it was also, liberals outraged at all the bigotry and the racism, etc. Now, that was a unique 4 years, right? And the 81 million that turned out for Joe Biden was incredible. And, whilst I am a major Biden fan, hands up, I don't think 81 million people turned out for Joe Biden. They turned out against Donald Trump. Fast forward that 4 years, when Trump has been relatively out of the limelight and that urgency is removed, we might end up back in a situation we got in 2016, where younger voters, liberals, progressives start, just lose interest or seem to lose enthusiasm or start buying into stupid narratives they find on the internet to undermine the person they should be voting for, logically. So I'm not ruling it out. By the same token, though, I think Trump will also struggle to get the enthusiasm he got in 2020 because of January 6th and because he's been out of the limelight, because a lot of people might realise that it was a grift. So I think he'll struggle to get 75 million, but it's not a done deal. That if it's Biden v Trump, it's far from a done deal.
Well, what about the midterms? And I'm just going back to what a veteran Trump insider said in a message seen by The Guardian. This is going back to last November or whatever, whenever the midterms were. Trump has no political skills left. His team is a joke. The ship is sinking, and Trump-backed candidates flopped in the midterms. Since then, we've had all the controversy of his arrest and everything else. Yet he could still win the election.
I agree with all that, and I think that the Trumpist candidates hurt them badly at the midterms. I think they continue to do so. All I would just say is the thing about Trump has always been that the imitators were never going to be able to do it like he does it, right? And so the fact that people didn't turn out for the Carrie Lakes and the Lauren Boeberts in 2022 doesn't necessarily mean that particular cult that he's got going on, that turned out in extraordinary numbers in 2020, won't do it again. And also, look, I mean, how many elections in the world have we seen it now? I do not underestimate the ability of fake news and micro-targeting, right? And it gets worse and worse, and they get more blatant. And I wonder what ops are ahead in the next 18 months. They're already trying to crash the economy with over the debt ceiling. They're already, the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be to sustain support spending on Ukraine. All of these things matter. So to me, I make Biden, if it's Biden v Trump, I probably make it around about 4 to 6, 11 to 10 to Biden, but no certainty.
Okay, William. So Tucker Carlson pushed out pretty much as was seen by Rupert Murdoch. We've had that massive legal case where Fox had to pay the guts of $1 billion. So this will, as we said, like last week, we said this will have repercussions in terms of the narrative ahead of the election. I just can't really see how Trump can galvanize. I can't see. Also, I think he's becoming more unhinged with every year, so I think he'll even be worse. I just think it's Joe Biden to lose. I don't really see what he can do to lose this. I don't see what Trump can do to win this. I don't
know. I would be more inclined to agree with Paul in the sense that I think Biden will be my favourite, definitely. And I think I might be more hopeful on his chances of being elected than most, especially with regards to doubts about age, etc. But in terms of what can he do to lose this, I think a series of major stumbles or bad campaign appearances would be something to avoid. I think the big worry is, everybody has a bit of a sort of moment when speaking. Trump actually has plenty. You don't notice it because he's constantly saying mad and unhinged stuff all the time, but he has it. Every politician has their slip-ups when speaking. If Biden was to appear like visibly more frail over a sustained period of time, I think that would be a worry. Let's not forget Clinton in 2016. There was all the fake news with it, right? But it certainly didn't harm Trump's chances. I think the economy is going to be massively important as well. Biden in general has had a lot of good wins during his presidency. I think more than most people, most observers would have thought possible, right? But he hasn't really properly got the credit for them with his approval ratings. They're not awful. They're not really bad. By recent American political standards, they're okay. I think he's doing better than Trump was heading to re-election. But he needs basically to keep doing what he's been doing, and also to navigate what's going to be a really difficult year or so with stuff like the judiciary, with stuff like any major reforms he wants to get through, and also in particular lots of distraction and investigations that are going to come his way in Congress. So I think if he can stay focused, basically, his chances increase with all that.
Where is the Conservative Party, Paul?
The British Conservative Party.
The US Conservative Party. We've
Oh,
only
the
enough time
Republican
for that
Party.
today.
Oh, well, I think that they've pretty much embraced fascism over the last 7 years. I think that Trump was a top hostile takeover, backed by Putin, but also, tapping into a deep subculture in America, which is maybe 15% of the country have always been fascist, right, or wanted to refight the Civil War, or whatever. And I don't really see a way out of it. I mean, I think that if they want to stop Trump, if the Republican hierarchy, who aren't themselves owned by Vladimir Putin or organised crime, if they want to claim their party back, they're going to, as we've seen with Ron DeSantis, they have to pick someone who can emulate Trump, right? Who can be a more effective version of the same fascist. Now, another person who I've said before, who I think is a value, that just as a trade, someone who I think will come in, is Brian Kemp in Georgia, who's about 150 to 1 for the nomination, 250s for the presidency. Kemp is, he's Georgia's version of DeSantis, right? Virulently anti-abortion and voting rights, this kind of thing. And Georgia's a critical swing state. Well, the thing about Kemp is he's already taken on Trump repeatedly and won, right? And he was re-elected by 9%, whereas the terrible Trumpist Senate candidate Herschel Walker lost. So if they get desperate, don't be surprised if the Republican hierarchy start calling out Brian Kemp.
Yeah, Herschel Walker, here's another character. Just to quote Marion McKeown in the Business Post on Sunday, she was at the NRA convention. The NRA convention may have taken place actually last week, but it's worth quoting nonetheless, just in relation, William, to where America is at in terms of the lunatic fringe of the far right. Military-style assault weapons, which can be purchased in most states by anyone over 18, are the weapons of choice for mass shooters because of their ability to unload 100 rounds in under a minute and the devastating impact of their ammunition. Almost every mass shooting in the US prompts President Joe Biden to lead a course of calls for a legislative ban on assault weapons, but Democrats and Republicans alike know it's an empty gesture. Such a ban would require bipartisan legislation, even if it withstood the scrutiny of the pro-gun conservative supermajority in the Supreme Court. FBI sources say attempts to enforce it would be the spark that ignites the far-right tinderbox. What the actual FUCK?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about it quite a lot on this show, but that it just feels so far gone. And the thing is, in theory, one would think that taking the stance Biden and other Democratic presidents have on gun control would be sort of an excellent rallying factor. But when it comes down to it, it's just unfortunately so baked in that I wouldn't say it'd be like the thing I'd look out to as a big needle mover. One thing as terribly sad as that is, I should say, one thing I think is really important, by the way, not to forget, or actually two things I'd say is, first of all, don't forget independent voters.
Mm.
Whatever you're doing before you're making any bets or any trades, whatever, go and do your data and your digging on independent pollers, voters, and see what they're thinking. Quinnipiac recently released a poll. This was around end of March, and it was based on whether Donald Trump should be disqualified for running for president if he gets criminal charges. Now, I should add, that's not going to disqualify him from running, but they polled the question, and independents by a margin of 55 to 36% for criminal charges should disqualify him from running for president again. It's just worth keeping an eye on what they're thinking as well, especially with so much polarization, and also with two people who, for all their sort of basically for all their history, most Americans actually wouldn't want a Trump Biden rematch. It looks like they'll get it, right? But most wouldn't want it. So when it comes down to it, the sort of narrow middle, particularly in battleground states, is going to be really, really important. So don't forget about independent voters. Also, one thing with Trump is if he gets, or when he gets, I should say, really bogged down with any legal stuff, etc., that can be quite a hampering to a campaign in all sorts of ways, particularly if a lot of his time is devoted to firefighting. New York, okay, that's pushed until December. We've got January the 6th. We've still got Georgia, right? We've got two cases with much more evidence, some might say, than New York, a lot more of it public domain. I wouldn't sort of forget about that when doing my general analysis for this.
Sticking with you, what's going on at Fox News?
Okay, so lots of big changes. Tucker Carlson, the big news, he's out. Complete shock. They were even promoting that night's Tucker Carlson Tonight Show. Then the news broke, Tucker Carlson and Fox have parted ways. Everybody taken by shock. Tucker's also his number one producer apparently out. This is supposedly related to the Dominion lawsuit, supposedly related to some claims about Tucker Carlson's conduct himself. What it does mean is that I think the most effective anti-Biden critic, I don't mean to say it to endorse Tucker's position, but he's a very, very effective communicator, is out. We also have a potential, right? And I'm not going to hype this up any more than it deserves to, I think, but we got a potential Springer in the race, right, for 24. Now, Paul, to be fair, long before me, put the sort of Tucker Carlson idea in my head. And he has taken a cut in the odds. He is now only 25 for the nominee, and he's also only 66 for president now. That's 66 from 150 to 1. I'm just saying, out at Fox, right? Yes, okay, he's lost that sort of platform. Don't underestimate the effect he can have on this race. Do not underestimate it one bit. There are few better communicators in America, especially to Trump's base, and what he says and does will have a big effect, I think.
I actually, Paul, I could completely see it. What do you make of it?
Well, I don't think that this has been planned, so I don't expect him to jump in any day soon, as it were.
Anyone can be American president now, you got to remember.
Absolutely. Trump's proved that. And I think that Tucker Carlson would be, because of his vast name recognition and reach and being an outsider, would have a better chance probably of being a Republican nominee than anyone bar Trump if he were on the ballot.
Don't be a sucker, vote Tucker. You can already see it now.
He's also, I mean, he's completely embraced this kind of Putinist view of the world. I mean, look, I said this when he went to Budapest and hosted his show from Budapest last year. That was the most straightforward signal that he is part of the Putin network, right? That's what they all do. People go to Budapest to signal their support, right? And since then, he's come back and he's become, far from just being a right-wing flamethrower, he's become a straightforward Russian propagandist. And if you watch all the footage coming out of RT and other Russian state media, they love him and they promote him in the same way they promoted Trump for years, right? Now, my feeling is that the plan on their part is we want this guy in the media, we want this geezer, pushing our talking points. But if Trump does fall under a bus, if he does end up in too much legal trouble, I don't think that network is not going to want a candidate in the race. And I would have thought Tucker Carlson is the obvious candidate to be that person. I mean, I suspect it's more of a long-term thing about let's build this guy's profile, let's make him the anti-establishment guy in maybe 2028. But you never know. And he was 700 to 1 on Betfair a few weeks ago. I had to have a few quid, so that's an exciting little bit.
He didn't know it on Monday, but maybe he does now that he's a presidency candidate for the next election. We'll stick with you, Paul, just ahead of the local elections next month. We had the Dominic Raab news since we were on last week. These elections will be quite interesting because we've had like a relative calm in the Conservative Party in the last since Sunak took over. I'm still not sure where Labour is. Lib Dems will be trying to make some ground, and the Greens. What do you make of it?
Well, I think we should be very wary of overstating the scale of a Tory defeat here or the scale of a Labour breakthrough. Because if I remember when these last elections were held, right, when these equivalent seats were held, the Tory party was in crisis, absolute crisis. It was shedding a lot of its vote to the Brexit party. And if you look at the results on that night, they lost a lot of seats, and a lot of them went to independent candidates who were basically local Brexit people, people who were again protesting Theresa May. So I think that the Tories will set out their, very negative expectations management of losing 1,000+ seats. I haven't been through the numbers in scrupulous detail, but I think it will be closer than I don't think it'll be that one-sided. I don't think it'll be that impressive for Labour. And I'd note too that they are coming back a bit in the polls, the Tories, and I'm beginning to get a little bit sceptical here about what Starmer's doing.
How do you mean?
Well, if he's going to go into the election as I am simply a more competent manager, a more competent technocrat than these people.
I'm not even convinced by that. I'm not convinced by that.
Yeah, it's not very convincing at all. And look, I think the Tories are pretty much on the same path as the Republicans, right? And can you imagine if the Democrats in 2016 had taken that route and said, okay, like Trump, we're just a bit more competent than Trump, and they hadn't framed it as this is a threat to democracy, he's a fascist, etc. I don't think they would have won. So I'm a bit worried where Labour are going, to be honest, on this.
Well, last word to you, William.
I think all of those concerns from Paul are definitely legitimate.
Do you really think the Tories are going that direction?
Yes.
I think
they're rigging everything. Rigging the media. Voter ID next week. Watch that. Watch the effects of that.
William?
I think there are a lot of really, really worrying authoritarian tendencies which are simply just being embodied by cabinet ministers, indeed the Prime Minister himself. And yes, I do think the party is taking a rightward turn, and yes, I do think there has been a lot of worrying policy, even more worrying rhetoric, and this is not just coming from the fringes. We've had issues in the past where sort of fringe parties or whatever have shot people with what they wanted to say and do, and they've got a bit of media notoriety. I think you're now seeing rhetoric from established high-profile politicians, which frankly should be very, very concerning, and frankly I think strays well beyond what I would consider to be normal or acceptable. That's a personal opinion, but yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. So just one thing actually before we end, but this will be a really interesting test of Labour's organisational skills. A local election's a great test of your machine, of where you're reaching.
I'm extremely skeptical. I'm like Paul. I think most people just don't give a shit. I don't know what they're like electorally on the ground.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, listen. Like, do not expect high turnover. Especially also with the voter ID thing. Like, do not expect a high amount of turnover or whatever. And I wouldn't go sort of having my next election bets based on this, but it will be a useful guide to tell us a few things. And in a way, it will be a really useful exercise. It will be sort of a form watchers exercise for political bettors. Hopefully we'll have a few markets too.
Hopefully we'll have a few markets. Yeah, so we talked about the US election and obviously the upcoming local elections in the UK, but we'll talk about more about that next week. Check out the website. Maybe Tucker Carlson, maybe it's the bet. You might not get on at 700s, but you might get on at a price that soon will look particularly attractive. We'll talk to you next week.